Good evening. Good to have you with us in this edition of the Urban Debate. Viewers, 2020 may be nearing an end, but our battle against coronavirus is far from over. In fact, in certain parts of the world, the battle is only intensifying right now, even as we make preparations and start rolling out vaccines across the country. Now, tonight, over the next 1 hour, we're going to focus again on coronavirus and multiple talking points that have emerged. We're going to talk about the global curbs and restrictions that are being brought in and why that's happening. What is this new UK COVID strain that everybody is talking about? We're also going to talk about why vaccine manufacturers are seeking indemnity, protection from any legal repercussions over the vaccine. Now, let me first tell you what's been happening. India has suspended all flights to and from United Kingdom till December 31st. In fact, those who are in transit already and will be landing up to tomorrow night will have to mandatorily undergo a test. And even if that RT-PCR test comes negative, they will have to stay in isolation for 7 days. That's not it. Saudi Arabia has banned all international flights as well. So from our country, we cannot be flying down to Saudi Arabia anymore. Strict restrictions. A lockdown in many parts of United Kingdom, strictest in London ahead of Christmas. And this is because there have been 60% new cases in London due to this new variant of the COVID virus. This is what we will talk about tonight. Experts say that the new mutation can actually spread 70% faster than what we have seen so far, which is why it has become such a big concern. WHO has cautioned Europe over COVID transmission, considering how interconnected UK is with the rest of Europe. This is now becoming a big concern, not just for United Kingdom, but also all European nations, and thereby that any travel that happens from these nations to other parts of the world. In Italy, all flights from UK have been banned. France has suspended all travel links from UK. Canada has halted entry of flights from UK, and very soon we will probably see these kind of restrictions for other parts of the world as well. Now, what do we know so far about this new variant? Keep in mind, so far there have been many variants of this COVID virus, some less dangerous, some a little bit more dangerous. But this one, this specific lineage B117 that was first identified in Kent in United Kingdom on September 20th, is considered to be one of the more dangerous ones. The UK Health Secretary announced the findings about this new variant on December 14th. Now, this is the serious one because of which there has been a massive jump in the cases, and there are severe adverse effects that some of these cases are actually showing. This variant, viewers, has begun to dominate over other existing versions of coronavirus and is said to be 70% more infectious than the other common version that we've seen so far. What's happening? What does this mean? And what does it mean especially for you and me sitting here in India? That's the first question I'm going to be asking our panelists. Let's say good evening to those who are joining us right now. Dr. Virander Singh Chauhan, Emeritus Professor at the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, joins us this evening. Professor Sanjeev Krishna, Professor of Molecular Parasitology and Medicine, Infection and Immunity Research Institute at St. George's University of London. We also say good evening to Dr. Mohan Gupte, Founder Director of the National Institute of Epidemiology in Chennai and former ICMR National Professor. And let's say good evening to Dr. Vikram Talaulikar, MD for MRCOG, Associate Specialist in Reproductive Medicine at UCLH and an honorary senior clinical lecturer at UCL. Thank you so much. Good evening to the panel that we have. I'm glad all of you could join us. If I can start with Professor Sanjeev Krishna first. Professor, help our viewers understand, what do we mean when we say this is 70% more infectious than the existing COVID that we all know of?
Well, thank you for having me, and good evening to you and to all your viewers as well. It's nice to be on this panel with someone I know as a colleague from the past, Virinder. Now, what we know so far, and we have to bear in mind that what we are picking up at the moment is very much work in progress, because the findings are very recent. But what we know is that this variant that you've shown on the screen there, lineage B117, seems to be increasing in the south and southeast of the UK when you compare it with the variants that were there before. And it's based on that increase and also looking at the number of cases that have been going up in certain areas, that the conclusion has come that this may be more transmissible compared with the previous variants. Now, it's very important to be cautious as well about what we understand at the moment, because, as I say, we need far more information. So if you have a correlation between the increase in cases and the presence of this variant, it doesn't mean that one is necessarily causing the other. There could be other factors that are affecting this, the spread of this variant as well. So we need to be a little bit cautious, and we need to accumulate more information, including laboratory experiments, to understand exactly what's going on.
All right. And, I think this becomes a lot more important for us to understand basis the information that we have. Like you pointed out, Professor, we don't have too much information. We're still finding out a lot more about it. But Dr. Virander Chauhan, this is now being reported in other parts of the world as well. Perhaps we don't know where it originated from. If it was United Kingdom, maybe people traveled from there to other parts. But help our viewers understand, how does this strain come into being? Is it a gradual evolution, or did we just know about it now and it's been around for a while?
So, first of all, thank you for having me, and I'm very pleased to see Sudhir Krishna. We worked together a long time back. So, coming to your, let's say, this is an RNA virus, as we've discussed this on this. Inherently, these viruses will mutate, can mutate. And it's not surprising, you'll collect mutations. Hopefully, and we always hope, actually in June, July, we were saying that this virus does not mutate very fast. There's good news for all of us who are taking vaccines and so on. But clearly, the virus is mutating. And what does more infective form of this virus mean? So virus has a way, it's a mechanism by which it enters a cell. And these things are very well known, explained to all the viewers before. There is a S-spike protein, there is a receptor. So clearly the virus has acquired mutation which facilitates this process of attacking the cellular system, and therefore it becomes more infective. And as you and everybody has already discussed, that there is no evidence as of now that this virus kills more people. And of course, repercussions would be if instead of 100 people, 170 people get infected, then many more people will then end up having severe disease, as you were in the case of the original virus you had. And there'll be more stress on the NHS, on England, or all systems. The question that you ask about emergence of this, let's say in this case in UK, but these mutations can be acquired anywhere and would be acquired anywhere. So virus is not choosing a place to cause mutation. Virus could mutate in South Africa, it could mutate in India, it could mutate anywhere. Hopefully, and we hope that most mutations will be harmless. Rather, I would hope that most mutation will make it weaker. I've said this earlier, it's not in the interest of virus to be more deadly. More infective, yes, it wants to multiply faster. So I would, of course, there is a sort of sense of panic right now because suddenly it's infecting large number of people. But I hasten to add this, that consider the previous virus itself was more infective. We would still fight or have to fight this virus exactly the way we were fighting the original virus, so therefore there is no immediate, of course there is a scare, and you want to contain it in all the places that the viruses emerged, the more infected viruses emerged. But the fact that Australia would report some and South Africa report some, tomorrow we might report some, we are racing, and I'll just take half a second. We are now racing to contain this virus through vaccination. We must continue to do everything that we were doing, even with more vigor. So viruses in cycles have to be broken, and it's in our hands to break it, and without panic.
Okay, you are saying not to panic. Yes, this virus does seem to spread faster, but Dr. Vikram, is there any evidence so far to suggest that it's more dangerous? That's the other aspect that we are trying to understand. It could be transmitting faster, but is it more deadly? We're going to go across to him in just a bit. Dr. Mohan Gupta, let me take that question across to you first.
Well, the information that we have got so far doesn't tell us that this virus is more deadly or more severe disease is being produced by that. There is nothing that emerges of that kind. And therefore, what we should take it as, it's not mortality, it's not morbidity that we need to worry about. The virus seems to be having a lot of transmissibility power, but it's not causing more than that any harm. It will go on for a while, and that's how it is going.
I also wanted to ask this, and Dr. Mohan, maybe to you first. Is there any evidence or research right now, data on the correlation with cold temperatures in this specific variant? Does it make it easier for it to transmit? I'm hoping against hope that it's more for the colder nations than us. Dr. Mohan, that question to you.
You are asking me this question?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think there is any information available of that kind as of now. And we have seen that temperature, whether it is higher temperature of 40 degrees Celsius or 46 degrees, as we have seen in Maharashtra, there is, in Parbhani in particular, in Maharashtra, Parbhani district, we have seen the transmission was going on very rapidly in that district, one of the topmost districts in the state of Maharashtra. So whether it is low temperature or high temperature, this virus doesn't bother about that. It just goes on in its own way. And fortunately, in India, we have not seen anything that is happening so far. Nobody has talked about this particular virus being detected in our country. So to talk about low temperature or high temperature and this strain in particular is very difficult at this particular point of time.
All right, let me move on to the other part, and this is a question many are asking Professor Sanjeev Krishna. The existing, vaccine candidates or even those who have been approved, will the same vaccines work for this one as well? Is there any doubt there whether or not it will be able to have a similar impact on this variant?
Well, right now, that is not a major concern, and let me explain why. The spike protein, which is like a spike sticking out of a football in the virus shape, if you like, the vaccine is designed, vaccines that we have are designed to the whole of the spike protein. And the variations that you're mentioning in B1117, for example, or other variants, these affect very small patches in the spike. Maybe 16, 17, 20 changes. And overall, you can't change the shape of the spike too much because that would then affect how the virus can get into cells at all. So the virus will then become crippled. So at the moment, because you're covering with your vaccine the whole of the spike protein, and the changes are very small patches in the spike, the feeling is that it is not going to be affected directly. What we do know is that these changes in the spike make the interaction with the cell tighter. They make it bind tighter. So it may make it easier, for example, for the virus to actually enter into the host cells. But I come back to the point that Virander made earlier, which is very important. And that is, irrespective of the strain of the virus, irrespective of what mutations there are, the method to handle it is exactly the same. So you should take the same precautions as you always have, whatever the strain. And of course, the urgency to get the vaccine out becomes even greater.
Yes, because you say that we need to handle it in the same way as we've been handling COVID so far. But honestly speaking, in many parts across the world, people had begun to let their guard down, even without the vaccine really, being utilized at a mass level. But everywhere from United Kingdom to even in parts of India to Australia, we're actually seeing people not follow the social distancing or not even wear a mask. Can this then be used as a reminder that we are still many, many months away before we stop doing those things?
I think you're making a very important point indeed. I think that there is clearly, across the nations, there is COVID fatigue. People are tired, even actually, of discussing COVID sometimes. They don't want to join in debates anymore. And so, we have to somehow keep reinforcing the message. And if this helps to achieve a clear message, then that will be one of the positive outcomes, whatever else is happening. The other positive outcome to remember is also that we do have vaccines now. They are being rolled out, and therefore there is a hope for an end to all this, which, let's say, a couple of months before wasn't as clear-cut. So I think what we need is to recharge our batteries and to keep our guard up, as you say, by sticking to the rules that allow interruption of transmission and good diagnostics.
Yeah, in fact, as we speak, just a couple of hours ago, here in Maharashtra and many of the big cities, they have announced a night curfew because they saw that people were not following norms. Restaurants and clubs and bars, they all opened up to crowded indoors and outdoors, which has become a concern right now for the government. And they've turned around and said, okay, post 11 p.m., none of that, not in the festival season. So maybe, governments are also looking at that kind of a response as a precautionary measure as we find out more and more about this strain. Dr. Vikram, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Vikram, experts here are telling us that, yes, while this new strain that we are talking about does spread faster, but it may not be any deadlier. Does it change our response to the specific COVID strain?
Thank you for having me on the show, Tanvi. Yes, I think it's been said that it's 70% more infectious or it transmits easily, but the symptoms and the course of illness is not changed. I think we go back to basics here, is that all the restrictions we said in the initial phase when the lockdown happened in March apply now. We want to keep this disease to minimum number of people because that's the problem, is that you have more and more people getting infected. All of them, or at least majority of them, will turn to hospitals. And then you will end up denying treatment because of overburdened health system, which is what we don't want at this stage. So everything to basics in sanitization, keeping distance, making sure you don't go out of the house unless it's really required. All those basic things will have to come back now.
And the other aspect, and that we were just discussing, minutes before you came in, Dr. Vikram, is, the plan that we had for our vaccines. Now, does this kind of a strain, which transmits easier and faster, does it make the job of a vaccine more difficult in terms of will it take us longer to break that chain of transmission now?
It's a good question. So it's a race now. The race is getting people to follow the importance of the social distancing and the vaccination. So you want to vaccinate as many people within a short period of time against the virus, which is going to spread in the community. So it's a race of one versus the other. The more the people you can vaccinate within a short period of time, the more the people obey the social distancing restrictions, you've got a better chance of defeating this new strain of virus. I know there are logistical issues in terms of the production capacity and the approvals for vaccines are still not on board entirely. But I think in the next few weeks, all this process should speed up so that we can catch up with the virus spreading on one hand and the vaccines and the distancing, testing and tracing on the other hand. So it's a race, yeah.
Dr. Virander, would you like to comment on this balance that we'll have to maintain and, how that may impact government policies?
Yeah, sure. So the COVID this pandemic has brought many balances, not just one balance. So I would, there's something which, when Sudhir was talking, I thought of that through your channel, what we need to hammer to the viewer, to the society, to get more behavioral scientists on board, have discussions, that we can't afford to have fatigue against this virus. I think that message needs to go as clearly as possible. And all the panelists today have said that we have to do everything with more vigor, not just to go back, because now may have even more infective strain. Therefore, the humans or the humanity will have to figure out much more internal strength, much more vigor, and follow these things as much as possible. The balance is this, that while you lock down and put restriction, you have the economy to run through. I don't want to get into the whole debate economy versus, but that business cannot stop. Education cannot stop entirely. You do online. So yes, it teaches us lots of balances, but the previous speaker just now said it is a race. And I think this is a race. Humans have to win this race. There isn't a choice. And this race can be won. Again, I said that our behavior. Vaccine, of course, had to be rolled out. The race is won. Vaccines can be rolled out, but vaccines have to be safe. Vaccines have to be efficacious. Vaccines, you can't take a chance because you have to immunize so many people. So you cannot hurry that beyond a limit. You got no corners in bringing the safety issues up. So that is a balance. Can we quickly bring a vaccine? The answer is we have brought vaccines very quickly as anybody could imagine. But it can't be at the expense of safety, security, efficacy. There are lots of balances that COVID is teaching us. Going to work, not going to work, going to lab, not going to lab, how much work can be opened, how much can't be opened. Whole world is dealing with it. But my view is that the humanity will always figure out ways, means maybe some losses, we'll always figure out some ways. So let the viewer really sink this in, that we must go back to the basics of having mask all the time, absolutely all the time. Wash your hands, keep your distance, and maybe more distance than before. And, big parties, marriages, I think we can just postpone all that for a while and see how to deal with the new variant.
Dr. Virander, to you and, I think everybody on this panel, while all of us do agree that that's the simplest and the safest way to proceed from here on until, the vaccine begins to have an impact on a larger population. But I don't know how many people are really in the mood to even listen to us when we say this. People, they want to attend weddings. They want to attend, festival dinners and, special occasion meetings. They want to travel. That's just going to happen now. Like you said, the fatigue that's come in is just so much that I think now people have just said, okay, no, enough is enough. We will see what has to be done. Yes, Dr. Virander, you wanted to come in?
No, just say this, that's fine. I totally agree. And all of us feel there's a fatigue, but then your eyes are wide open doing what you're doing. But there is something called social responsibility.
Yeah.
I may say that I don't care what happens to me. But if you don't care, but you could be hurting very large part of the society. So the element of social responsibility, humans are pretty good at it. I think we just need to drive the message more and more and more till everybody gets the message correct.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Dr. Mohan Gupta also wanted to come in. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. You see, what I see is we are unnecessarily creating a lot of fear all around. I don't entirely agree with that. We have seen that the cases have gone down in India over the last 2.5 months. Mortality has come down, morbidity is much less severity of the disease. Disease is coming, there is no doubt about that. At the same time, we have also seen that the vaccines are getting ready. They are not yet being released at all. We know that Pfizer and Moderna will not be available in India. We cannot afford to have those vaccines. The vaccine from Serum Institute, the Oxford vaccine, we are waiting for the phase 3 results still. And the phase 2 and 3, the bridging study that Serum Institute is doing, I think they may take about a week, 10 days more till we get those results. The same true for Bharat Biotech vaccine also. The phase 3 is going on, and the results of phase 3 will take little time, even though it's adaptive design, and we know that the results should be available as early as possible. but it's not that we can see happening immediately. The vaccines availability, as our minister says, should be available sometime in January, maybe mid-January or end of January. If that is so, the way we are going to proceed also will be slightly slower. We have got already laid down various kinds of ways how to prioritize who should get those vaccines and so on. We are concentrating on reducing the mortality and doing in that way. We cannot afford to stop our economy also. Keeping all those things in mind, I think we should not unnecessarily create the fear. We should not think that the the strain, England strain, is already in India. It may come. But our people already have developed a certain extent of herd immunity.
Okay.
We should keep all those things for
let me also, I agree with you, Dr. Mohan Gupte. I will say that at this point, basis what all experts are telling us and what I've been able to read up about this, I don't think any of us are advocating a stricter lockdown or an economic lockdown, at least in India. Many other nations have actually, and especially in United Kingdom in many parts, they have begun to do that. But I take the point you're making. And let me ask Dr. Vikram this question. Dr. Vikram, do you think the response that we are seeing from various nations right now to this development is a bit of a stretch? Are we being over precautious?
No, I wouldn't say that. And the reason I'm saying that is because everybody's buying time to study the new strain.
Yeah.
No one knows, for example, although we say it's 70% more infectious, you want to know how this strain is going to circulate in the community, how many people are going to get the severe illness, how many of them will turn to hospitals, and will hospitals be able to cope? So I think some of the airlines and the airports banning, which you've seen now, is important, because all these countries are trying to do is not to get that load of cases coming into them, while they have time for their experts to analyze the data over the last 2 or 3 months in September about how this particular strain behaves. It's absolutely true that you got to balance the lives and livelihood. You got to go ahead with precautions against the virus to prevent deaths. And you also got to then make sure your economy is running to some extent to support people's livelihoods. But the crux is this, is that you got to follow the precautions that you did right from March until now. That's not going to be something extra that you have to do. You got to just get the basics right in terms of the sanitization, the masks, etc. And that will give enough time in terms of experts to analyze this strain over the next 3 to 4 weeks to know what further measures need to be put in place, if at all, because there are many viral strains which look dominant but actually fizzle out. You might find in a few weeks' time that we're not giving such an importance to this particular strain because we believe that it's not causing too much of a problem. But because we're in early stage, we got to keep our eyes open, take some precautions, which I think has been a measured response from the rest of the world. And the UK, of course.
Okay. Professor Krishna, do you have a view on it? And also, for our viewers to understand, how many, roughly, variants of this virus have we observed in the last few months across the world?
Well, there are a lot of variants. The significance of them sometimes is very hard to understand. Some of them increase binding to the host cells. Others may have other properties. But so far, I think it's been fortunate that there's not been anything which is so functionally relevant that has, for example, increased disease severity. Now, I come back to the broad brush of how to deal with COVID in the last few months and how to carry on. In my opinion, I think the messaging is absolutely crucial. And here is where, our media colleagues, yourselves, for example, have a crucial part to play. And the balance is between providing the right information, but as we've already heard, not necessarily causing alarm. Because what needs to be done is clear in terms of preventive measures. It's been well discussed already. The question is getting people to accept that that is worthwhile. And it may be worth pointing out that certainly in the UK, for example, many people now have got relatives or friends who've experienced COVID and perhaps even sadly lost relatives with COVID. And there's one other final point about the whole pandemic, which is worth bearing in mind. And that is that we are still in the very early phase of understanding what the long-term consequences of having an infection might be. And these could still be quite serious and severe over a long period of time for a certain proportion of people. So it really, really, really is worth everyone doing their best to minimize transmission by the precautions that we mentioned until we get to the stage where people can be protected, particularly the vulnerable populations, by the vaccine.
All right, point noted, Professor Krishna. In fact, I've run out of time on this part of the conversation, and I'm going to thank the panelists who joined us this evening. It's been an insightful conversation. Let's hope that we're able to, find out more about this virus with minimum impact across the world. Like our experts have told you, yes, this one does transmit easily. It's easier to latch onto the host cells which are present there in our bodies. And so the transmission rate is about 70% more than the other common variant of COVID virus that we know about. But it hasn't shown any evidence so far of being deadlier. So our response is essentially going to be the same even to this new variant that first seemed to have emerged in the United Kingdom and has led to these large set of restrictions. Of course, there's a large amount of concern across the world right now, but that's also more about not knowing enough about this one while it is showing signs of spreading faster than the others. In Europe, obviously, and other countries obviously have to be on guard and on high alert, because while you're trying to cut the chain of transmission by bringing in vaccines as soon as possible, you don't want a variant in your region, which just makes that task a lot more difficult. Thank you to the panelists who joined us. Let's move on to the second part of this conversation. Now, the CEO of Serum Institute of India, Adar Poonawalla, just a few days ago said that the government must protect the COVID vaccine manufacturers against lawsuits during this pandemic. In fact, Poonawalla said that this is needed because when frivolous claims come up and get blown out of proportion, then it becomes, extremely tricky for the manufacturers, and it makes the general public skeptical about the vaccine itself. It could also lead to spreading of misinformation now. So essentially, you have your vaccine manufacturers who are saying that the government needs to protect us from any kind of a legal repercussion, any kind of a legal response in case there are any adverse effects of these vaccines. Why are they saying this? What are the concerns? And who should then take responsibility of any adverse effects? Nobody. The manufacturer, the researcher, the government. Whose responsibility will it be? That's the question I want to ask. Dr. Virander Singh Chauhan continues to stay with us on this conversation. I also have Dr. S. Balasubramanian, advisor for the Committee of Immunization for the Indian Academy of Pediatrics, and Murli Neelkantan, lawyer specializing in healthcare law and former Global General Counsel of Cipla and Glenmark. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us right now. Mr. Murli, if I can begin with you on why is it that the vaccine makers are a little nervous today and are seeking some kind of a indemnity from the government?
I think it has to do with the whole process of vaccine development being accelerated and not having enough time to do the usual style of clinical trials. So the level of confidence that manufacturers have in the West about these vaccines is not as much as they would have had in the past. If you see the size of the trials, these are large trials. We're talking about 40, 60,000 people. So they are large trials, but we haven't had enough time. So normally with drugs as well, you would wait for a period of time after the drug is administered, wait for it to show if there are any medium or long-term effects. We haven't had any of that in this case. And that's what's making them nervous.
So then the question is, Dr. Virander Singh Chauhan, if there are adverse effects, does anybody take responsibility for that? Yes, we don't know enough about these vaccines in terms of data over a period of time. These are all new vaccines that have been developed. We don't know how it may impact us 6 months or a year down the line. Is it the government's responsibility? Is it the maker's responsibility?
So let me just take a step back and in continuation to what Murli just now said. So what has happened in the present? And remember, these all regulatory authorities have given permission for what we call an emergency usage only. So just keep that in mind. Everybody should keep that in mind. These are very unusual. Remember, by April, May, June, we were all excited that very large number of candidates are being done. Phase 1 trial, more than 60 have been safe. So everybody was agog that science has moved so fast. And we have brought these vaccines, the science or scientists or the manufacturer have brought these vaccines within a year time. And everybody knows a normal vaccine against a virus or bacteria or a parasite would take at least 15 years. So what has happened then? I said it earlier, I say it again. Even in this process of huge rush, I don't believe this is my belief, no corners have been cut. So it's not surprising that the Moderna vaccine, after Pfizer vaccine was FDA approved, which much after UK approved, people looked at data very carefully. But this is all that you can do. Just now we were saying it's a race against this virus, which is spreading very fast. And vaccine will be a major tool to contain the virus. So these are you can say these are two contradictory pathways, because long-term effects can only be found out in the long term. But there is no time for a long term. So I personally think that since I believe no corners have been cut, data of safety has been shared, large number of people have taken, all care has been taken. I think the manufacturer are in a right spot, a right square to ask for indemnity, because nobody knows if there are going to be 1% or 0.5% or 0.1% adverse effect and what those effects might be. So the other choice would be a dramatic extreme choice, but we wait another 5 years till we find out the long-term effect and then start vaccinating. Obviously, we don't want that situation. So this is emergency use, and this comes to be balanced. Only assurance that we have, at least from the 4 or 5 vaccine, their phase 1 data has been submitted. That's no wonder that the Drug Controller of India sent back the data a couple of weeks back that we need more data. And those assurances are very necessary, that we must look at the sufficient amount of data, not just data. If sufficient amount of data, then we should go ahead. And remember also that the most vaccines as of now have been purchased by governments in UK, USA, Canada, and the governments have invested in the development of this. So the government, directly or indirectly, are hugely involved in this. So I would say that given the position that we are in, I think that what Sudhir has said previously, that we should very clearly hand out all the information that we have, data about tests were done, the control tests were done on this population. Other population might be susceptible. With that clarity of people who take vaccination, I think the manufacturers are absolutely correct in saying that they want legal indemnity. This is my personal view.
Okay, let me also bring in Dr. Balasubramanian on this. Dr. Balasubramanian, do you agree that like many nations, and I was just reading about it, including United States, United Kingdom, even the Australian government, many of them have begun to provide this kind of a protection to the vaccine manufacturers. Should India also do the same?
Before I start answering your question, I think it must be a record of all sorts for a vaccine to be made available within such a short time. This has not happened in the history of medicine for any other disease.
Yes.
Normally, the gestation period is quite long, and to all our pleasant surprise, the vaccine is out. Before introduction of any vaccine into the community, we always look at the risk-benefit ratio. We ask ourselves, is there a need for vaccines? Yeah, nobody would disagree that there is a need for preventing this disease world over. There is a definite need is there. Is there a risk of giving vaccination? If somebody says, my vaccine is 100% safe, there is no risk at all, it's wrong. Every vaccine produced in the world has got some risk, and we always weigh the risk-benefit ratio. By and large, whatever data that is available, the presently introduced vaccines are pretty safe. with the data available. But the data is available only for a short time. But there is an emergency. That is why the governments across the world are hurrying up to introduce vaccination, particularly in high-risk group. With availability of data, our controlling authorities like the DCGI, I'm sure will be convinced that the currently available vaccines across the world are pretty safe, at least with the data available. And I'm very confident in the next month or two, India also will be buying these vaccines and introducing particularly to the high-risk population. That should be the right step at this point of time.
Okay. All right. But then I was reading about the vaccination injury compensation programs that many of the nations have internationally, Murli. And it's essentially a no-fault scheme which is set up where there is some kind of an insurance involved or a guarantee involved where the government essentially takes the responsibility. Would that be correct? How does it work? And if we had to look at it, how would we go about it?
I think you have to understand two different aspects when it comes to India. One is that medical claims of any kind are going to be virtually impossible for the common man to actually go and collect. If you remember, Mirror now did a series of shows on the J&J implant, on a whole lot of these issues. So let's not make a big issue out of this problem. There are not going to be thousands of claims for injury caused by vaccines in India. We just accept it as our destiny and we just move on. So in the Indian scenario, somebody telling me that there are going to be lakhs of claims and each of these claims is going to be worth crores of rupees and going to succeed in the Indian legal system is laughable. So we are trying to solve a problem that does not exist. Secondly, in Europe and in other countries where the government has procured vaccines, the government's also an investor in those vaccines. Also, the vaccines are given away for free. They're completely voluntary. There is no pressure on anyone to take it. Therefore, each individual gets a chance to take this vaccine. Hopefully, everything will work fine. There's a small chance that things go wrong. Then I'll take that risk. It's all well and dandy to say those who make the vaccine should be indemnified. But it's a big risk that people will start getting lax about it if you say there's no risk, you can go ahead and do it. So there's a big risk, at least for countries like us, to say, don't worry, the vaccine is safe, but if it goes wrong, bad luck. There's a big risk with people then saying, oh my God, are they hiding something? Do we not know what's happening? So a large population will just take it. It's India. A small population will perhaps worry about it, and a smaller population perhaps not take it. So let's not make this into a big legal issue that requires a solution. I don't think there is a legal issue. I don't think there's a legal problem. Even if you take clinical trials, how many cases have we had in 10 years? Very few. How much payment have we made in 10 years? There was a minister who said we paid 12 crores in 10 years. I mean, that's virtually nothing. Besides the problem we have, that's virtually nothing. So I think this is made out to be a big issue in the rest of the world because it is. You can get claims. In India, you're not going to get claims. Nobody's going to sue. Nobody's going to succeed, and nobody's going to pay.
But I agree with you that we are not so proactive or active when it comes to dragging companies to the courts over these kind of claims. We know it's going to take just years and years, and probably the returns are not going to be proportionate. But are the companies or manufacturers feeling more nervous today? Because this is a different case. When they're going in for approvals, they don't have that kind of historical data to back their vaccine and the claims that they're making, which is why, and also there is so much hype. Right now, if you ask anybody in India, 80 to 90% would say, I want to be the first one in the queue to get the vaccine.
Exactly. And which is why the companies who are seeking approvals are not nervous. In fact, some of the data we're seeing is fairly aggressive. And it's a good thing when the regulator pushes back to say, I think that's a little aggressive. Let's get conservative. Let's see a little more data. So we already have that. And we're not going to see claims in India. So let's focus on getting good data, getting good approvals, getting good vigilance so that we know what is happening to people who are healthy, people who are taking the vaccine. Litigation, claims, indemnities, insurance is just, I think, a big distraction.
Okay, so let me take this a step forward, and Dr. Virander, maybe you can come in on this. Rather than, and maybe the government wants to look at this request that the manufacturers have put in, but rather than this, should we be focusing more on informing people about the vaccine, the fact that it may not be 100% effective, the fact we don't even know how long the impact may last, and that is even voluntary, it's not even mandatory right now that everybody gets one.
No, so you're absolutely spot on. Not only government, but even the manufacturers.
Yeah.
So, for example, some of the data of phase 2, phase 3 is not made public, so hopefully it will be made public. If everybody shared the data they produced, the level of risk or level of benefit will be much easier for people to assess. For example, in this case, when we do a mass immunization of lakhs and lakhs of people, there would be, I cannot see not having more adverse events. Each adverse event should be very carefully examined, should be followed. I again go back to what I said. All the vaccines have got emergency usage, and that's for no other reason, because we are in a very emergent situation. So to answer your question, the transparency of data, in fact, the phase 1 data of the 5 leading is published in very decent journals, and the data is accessible to all of us. Why did FDA took so long to look at Pfizer? Because they threw a comb, they must have looked at every single case, every single variation, and that's the level of, I think that's the pillar of confidence that we should have in our agencies. Following which, again, you could have risks. After all, you're putting something in your body. There would be infinitely small, but the risk would be there. When I go for an operation and I go you operate on me, there's always a risk. But I go and get my knees replaced. I go and get my liver transplant done and so on. So vaccination is not that kind, no comparison, but vaccine is the major hope to contain this virus and get back to some sort of normalcy. So I would agree with the previous speakers, they've said, but I don't totally agree that in India these cases cannot be there. I think people will wake up and do these cases. My focus would be on transparency. If adverse event happened, it should be immediately brought to the notice without panicking. And those of us who work in the area, we know that there are inherent issues after you're introducing. It happened with the Salk vaccine when the polio vaccine was being discovered. Look into the history of polio vaccine development. People, when the live virus was given, there are some very small number of people actually did get polio. This is the history of vaccine. So I wouldn't worry too much, but I think companies are absolutely right in asking, and the government should be right in protecting them.
Well, and maybe also because we've seen one case, and though that was a trial volunteer who's already dragged the Serum Institute in Tamil Nadu to court over it. So maybe they're just now being cautious as well, not wanting to take any chances. Thank you to the panelists who've joined us right now for your expert comments on this and helping us understand. I just want our viewers to know what Adar Poonawalla and many others are actually asking for. Is something that across the world, many big countries and their governments have provided to the manufacturers. But while they have done that, they've also come up with a compensation scheme for the people who will be vaccinated. So, for example, in USA, there is an entire compensation scheme that's been announced, and it's obviously for specific points, and there is a defined criteria for eligibility. In United States, it's childhood vaccines, vaccines administered to armed forces, influenza vaccines. In UK, it's again, similar to that. Also in instances with more than 60% disability. In New Zealand for severe injuries. So the compensation really mechanism for vaccine-related injuries depends from country to country. But Germany, Denmark, Canada, South Korea, Finland, Italy, many of these nations actually have some or the other kind of a system. Maybe our government wants to look at it as well. It really depends on how the conversation goes. We're not done with this yet. We are going to take a very short break, but on the other side, I've got Kiran Mazumdar-Shah also joining us for an exclusive conversation on this specific aspect. She believes this kind of an indemnity should be given to all vaccine manufacturers. Stay with me.